Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Quitcast. My name is Becca Syme, and today we have a topic that has come up in coaching a lot over the last couple of years, and it's a question in particular that I kind of get asked in a way where people throw up their hands and ask the question in kind of a rhetorical way, but there's always an answer to rhetorical questions. So the reminder I give everybody around here when we're doing QTP work is to never let rhetorical questions stand. We always want to answer them. So here's the answer to the rhetorical question. Why is this so hard? In particular, why is my writing so difficult? Why is it so hard to get through books? This comes across in different ways. It might be, why isn't it easier as I'm getting more and more books under my belt, right? Why am I not getting better at this? Why is it not easier? And I have some answers for that question. And then there's some other iterations of why is this so hard that I want to tackle as well. But the majority of these are going to be about writing in particular. So there's 13 reasons, primary reasons, I'm going to say, because there are actually more. There's so much nuance, but I'm trying really hard not to nuance my way out of not doing content. The really frustrating part about being able to see big picture patterns is that you don't always just see them, or I don't always just see them in like 4 buckets, which would be really easy, or like 5 reasons or something like that. There's always 100 or 1,000. And I try to pick the ones that are either the most overlapping or are the most common. And this was a pretty easy one to find common reasons for, but there are more nuance. And if you have questions, you can always ask them in the comments. But for now, we're going to start with the 13 most common reasons why this is so hard. You're not going to like a lot of these answers. So when you ask a question that's rhetorical, especially when you're kind of throwing your hands up in the air, and by the way, the act of throwing our hands up in the air and asking questions like this is biologically necessary for us to have some kind of connection to something. This is the stance that we use when we're reaching for our parents when we're young, right? We are looking for something above us to give the answer. Some of us translate that into additional things above us, people who are above us, experts who are above us, the universe, God, spiritual beings, things that are bigger, like invisible and bigger than us, right? But ultimately, the question, the reason we throw our hands up in the air is an echo of the fact that we instinctively understand we cannot do everything on our own. And sometimes the reason we throw our hands up is to actually just ask for connection, that this is a bid for connection between me and another author. I know that there is not a way to fix this problem, or I think there isn't. There might be, we'll talk about that. But I know there's quote unquote not a way to fix it. And so I'm often looking for comfort or connection. And it's important to acknowledge that that is a reason to ask this question. When things are hard, when we feel emotions, there's always an action point to every emotion. Some of you want to tap out as soon as I start talking about emotions, and it frustrates me because you're still feeling them all the time, and they are still causing action inside you, and you don't understand the actions that they're causing, or you don't like the outcomes of them, but you can't take the time to do the work to change the underlying emotions. And I'm going to stop right there because that's not what I don't want to go down a rabbit trail on this, but I need some of you to just acknowledge you're uncomfortable talking about emotions because you don't have a lot of facility with them. You don't feel them consciously often enough. But every single action comes from either an environmental, a biological, or a psychological cue of some kind. Everything that we do, which means that most of our actions, if they're not cued by biological or not cued by something that we're responding to in our environment, are emotional. And we don't know that because it is intentionally subterranean in our lives. But if you have more control over those responses, then you can be more helped by it, which is again the reason why I need to answer with 13 different, because there's a lot of complex things happening and there are a lot of motivating factors behind this. So I want to jump into the why is this so hard and the answers to that question, but I needed to get through Some of you are feeling feelings and you need connection. And that is the action point at the end because every single emotional trigger has an action point at the end. And so some of you just need the connection. That's not a reason. That's not the answer, right? But it is the reason sometimes. So, anyway, let's talk about the 13 answers to this question. Why is this so hard? So, the first answer is because this is way more complicated than you realized when you started. When we start learning how to write a book, just as a for instance, especially those of us who begin somewhat intuitively in our process, we kind of assume that writing a book is one skill. Like I have a skill at writing a book, but actually, the skills that allow writing a book to happen are hundreds, sometimes thousands of skills. And when a task like writing a book or a project is so much more complicated than we realize, and there are so many more things happening, inherently, as we get farther and farther into the process and we uncover more and more skills, or we learn more about the craft and the process, it's so much more complicated than we realized. So, the problem that we have, and this particular answer happens to a specific group of people, and it's usually people who are seeking competency, and specifically for whom competency is usually easy to achieve. So the people who get frustrated who have this answer almost always look like people who very easily pick up on patterns and learn new things. People who are used to gaining competency in narrow, focused, linear skills very quickly. So I can learn how to tie my shoe, right? That's a very focused skill very quickly. And if I can also learn how to apply makeup or how to maintain a knife collection or how to chop an onion or something like that, like I can learn and perfect that skill and reach competency very quickly, then I start to believe that something like writing a book should also have that very quick, very linear projection. And I start to get frustrated with myself when I'm 30, 40, 50 books in and it's not getting any easier and is in fact sometimes getting more complicated. But the first answer, why is this so hard, is it is so much bigger than you thought it was when you started. It is not a linear task. So you can't expect it to get easier when it is extremely complicated if you are continuing to progress in your skills. Because the problem with people like this in this way, who are used to gaining competency quickly, is that they are used to repeating the same task over and over and over again. And their competency grows because they start to find the places that they could do a particular skill better. So I could do the double bow on my shoes instead of the one bow and wrap around in one bow, right? Like they start to look for ways to make the process more efficient, make it more effective. And the more narrow the skill is, the easier it is for them to progress in their competency in it and specifically in their mastery of it because it's not that complicated. When something is more complicated, it is extremely difficult for people who are like this to internalize just how complicated it is because many of the skills they will already be naturally good at, or they will have applied skills from other places that they, like when I read a bunch of books or watch a bunch of movies and I watch arcs happen, I naturally get better at arcs because I'm internalizing those patterns if I'm wired this way, right? Because I'm used to being faster at my competence. When I get slower at competence, or when I get worse, quote unquote, worse at it, because I feel like I'm worse at it after 25 books instead of more competent, it's primarily because I haven't identified all the places that I am not repeating the same task over and over. So every time my process changes or I learn something new, like a new way to build characters, a new way to world build, I'm challenging myself to assimilate a new task. I am no longer repeating the same skill. I'm not tying my shoes anymore. I'm learning how to tie my shoes again. And the issue here is that because the project is the same, let's call it the end accomplishment is the same. I'm still completing a manuscript. It feels to us, those of us who are wired this way, like it's the same task over and over again, but it's not the same task. Every time you add a skill, change a skill, increase a skill, every time you start a new skill, you are essentially doing a different process than you were before. So you're starting over again every single time you're writing a new book. And this is hard for some of us to internalize because we are not as conscious about skill building when we're wired this way. And so we feel like, but I'm just writing new books. But when I talk to you, when I coach you, you read a craft book and assimilated a new way of world building. You're now trying to become a plotter because you don't like being a pantser. You're now trying to become a pantser because plotting feels too wooden for you. You tried a new technique for tropifying, whatever it is that you're doing new stuff all the time. And so you're not repeating the same process. It's harder to get better at a process that you don't repeat. And that some of you need to write down somewhere for yourself is when you don't repeat the process. And again, writing a novel, I tie my shoes maybe 2 or 3 times a day. Apparently not very good at tying my shoes. My knots come untied all the time. Anyway, I digress. Um, that means in a week, I might be tying my shoes 21 times. It might take me 21 years to write 21 novels. So there's also this thing of like, I'm not accomplishing the full task often enough to get so much better at it that it's making a difference in my competency. Again, also added complexity is if I'm changing skills all the time. But progressing in complicated tasks because writing a book is not a skill. Writing a book is a set of skills. It is a craft, one might say. Because when I make a piece of furniture, I'm not practicing a skill, I'm practicing a lot of skills. So I think some of it is that we just don't understand what we're really doing and how complicated it is, what we're really doing, and the fact that we're not repeating it. So that's kind of the first answer. The second answer to why is this so hard applies to those of you who are bread machine writers. And I have a post on the Patreon I will link to describing more about what I mean about bread machine writers. But essentially, if you like to think a lot about your book when you write or your scene or your characters or whatever, and you find yourself wanting to finish thinking before you execute on something, you're a bread machine. You close the lid, process, open the lid, bread's done, make a sandwich. If you try to pull the dough out in the middle of the process, you can't make a sandwich with that. And because you can't put it back in, once you've cut it, you have to now take something like a hair dryer and dry it by hand, which is why many bread machine writers have years of edits after they write a NaNoWriMo novel because they wouldn't let themselves do the bread machine processing over time. So when you're a bread machine writer, once you start publishing for money, like once you start trying to treat this like a profession, you can often change your process away from what's best for you because you feel like you have to, because there's so much anti-thinking rhetoric in the productivity industrial complex to a point that it's dangerous for those of us who are really good at thinking, which is why we talk so much about it around here. So when you're a bread machine, and you believe that thinking is evil, you listen to things like you can't edit a blank page, uh, don't edit as you go, stuff like that. This is why we've QTP'd all that stuff, right? Questioned the premise of all those things is because for a segment of the population, that's a fairly large segment, by the way. We're not talking 10 writers, and we're also not talking beginners. I think a lot of people assume that beginners are bread machines, but there are people who are literal 8 and 9 figure authors who are bread machines, and you can hear it when they talk about it. These are the kind of people who say things like, I need to let things percolate in the back of my head before I can write them, right? That's the kind of person we're talking about. They are all over the place in high echelons of writing. This is not a skill set that if you can just work yourself past this, you're going to somehow grow out of this. This is a type of person. It's a type of writing process. It's an archetype, essentially. But the point is, if you are wired this way, and you have changed your process, it's going to become more and more and more difficult for you to get through books in a way that's healthy and helpful for you because you changed your process, because you think you're supposed to be different than you are. Because again, when people from workshop stages tell you you should do it this way, who are you to argue with them? Like that's how we feel, right? It's the certainty correctness scale. Someone can be completely and totally certain and absolutely wrong, and you can be uncertain AF, just completely uncertain and completely right at the same time, but we don't know that. So now you know that. Question the freaking premise, people. Anyway, I'm going to stop. Got to get to the next answer. But that's a big one. A significant portion of people need to hear that. More than 60% of writers have intellection as a dominant trait. And not all intellections are bread machines, but a fair portion of them are. So it's a large number of us. Answer number three, you might get bored quickly. And if you get bored quickly, it's going to become more difficult for you to complete the trajectory of something. And I see this happen a lot when people listen to the you have to do this the same way. You're not going to make money in publishing unless you do exactly the same thing for the readers all the time. You owe the readers, book after book after book after book in the same genre, in the same series, in the same, and some people thrive on that. They are absolutely, that is their home planet. And when you're like that, you should absolutely do it. This is just for a certain type of people. When you are this type of person, though, and this happens the most often with high ideation people, but it can also happen with high learner in the Clifton Strengths metric. That is the creativity. Ideation is the more creative thinking strength, like popcorn ideas. Learner is I want new things, right? I want to reach competency and then find something new to do. That's not all learner, but that's where the thread is with this particular problem. And it's not a problem in the sense of you don't need to be different. You just need to work with it. So the way that I usually encourage people to do this is write one or two books in your main genre, like the money maker, and then write something else that's completely different that doesn't bore you to tears. Or the other option that we'll do every once in a while is, well, I can only stand to write about 6 books in a row in one genre or one whatever. And I'll be like, great. We try the 2-in-1. They just can't. They're so afraid of not making money that they won't allow themselves to do the thing that's the best for them, which again, that's a learning curve everybody's got to go on. But then they'll do like 6 or 7 books in one direction, get completely worn out on it, and then move into a different direction and go. And it may be slide adjacent, like going from cozy to paracozy, or going from historical cozy to contemporary cozy mystery, or going from small town romance to sports romance or something like that, right? Where you're not really writing significantly different underlying architecture. You're just changing everything about the outsides so that it's more interesting to you. But when you get bored quickly, it is extremely common that this is going to be very hard for you to do when you are bored. And rather than trying to force yourself, because there's a lot of rhetoric out there that's like, well, just make yourself do it. This is a job. And I'm like, except that's not sustainable. If you're wired this way, forcing yourself to do this is not actually going to help you get sustainably better at it. You can't manufacture when you have that high of a boredom threshold. You cannot manufacture the ability to do this. You have to work with that. So then what happens, and again, my suggestion is always give yourself an out in some way. Look for the ways to have more creativity and more, be surprised more in the main moneymaker that you actually have, but you're gonna have to let yourself explore and experiment, or it will not be sustainable. So when we run experiments on this, what we see is that if people will let themselves have that candy book, they'll often write more in like a 1 year period than they would if they just forced themselves to write 6 books in a row, for instance, and not do anything else. And then they've burned out on that genre. In addition to that, at the end of that year, if they're writing that fast, not everybody does. It's not an expectation that everyone should write that fast. But they might get bored in that so quickly that they can never write in it again. And so for me, the 1-1 or 2-1 or 3-1 is a way to keep them in that genre more sustainably. And again, my goal 100% of the time is author for life. Like it is the sustainable production of whatever process. Can I make myself do anything? Yeah, of course. I can force myself if I'm a pantser to be a plotter. I can force myself if I create enough architecture externally to do anything. But is it sustainable? That's the question for me. So when you are this dominant in traits that require new and different, we call them the new and different strengths, right? When you're that dominant, you have got to learn how to work with that process in a way that is sustainable for you, which often looks like doing things completely different at least once in a while, giving yourself a candy book, giving yourself a second pen name or something where you just get to do play arounds, right? Because you need that difference. Answer number 4 to why is this so hard? Those of you who are very hard on yourselves, like you are trying to be successful, and by being successful, you are hard on yourself. Some of us are hard on ourselves for beneficial reasons, and some of us are not. And I think that's also really important to remember. Not everyone is wired so that being hard on yourself produces success for you. That is super important to remember. Some of us are hard on ourselves because it's what we were taught. We think that it's supposed to be helpful, but the evidence says it's not actually helpful. So we need to be really cautious if we have an instinct to be hard on ourselves, but it's not producing beneficial action, that we need to question whether that's really a good idea for us to do or not. But this answers for both of those groups of people, whether it works for you or not. When you are very, very hard on yourself and you are trying to get better at something, that being hard on yourself means that you are creating, because again, you're trying to increase your capacity. You're creating difficulty for yourself to overcome. And it's not a bad thing. Again, we talked in answer number 1 about how complicated this process is. So often when you're hard on yourself, you're looking for ways to improve, and that can be beneficial because you're giving yourself skills to increase, etc. But it also means that it's going to be hard. So this is one of those cases where when you are very hard on yourself and then you ask, why is this so hard? The answer is because I'm hard on myself. And I don't think that's always a bad thing. So I'm not a person who's like, and we need to change that, because that can actually be really beneficial for people. The question is it helping you, or is it just creating stress and not helping you? Does it make you want to give up? When it doesn't make you want to give up, I'm a fan of letting it stand. Because if, as long as it is not overly stressing you to a point where like your body, it's not sustainable, right? Your body's retaliating against it, you're getting burned out a lot, etc. Like as long as it's sustainable, I'm a fan of letting it stand. So if you're hard on yourself, though, you have got to answer this question with, why is it so hard? It's because I make it hard, because I like hard things, because I like to accomplish things. I like to be successful. So when it's hard because I'm making it hard, I want to acknowledge, I think it's beneficial for me to be like this. But I also want to not spend too much time asking this question because, again, we talk about the negative emotion cycles a lot, right? So every emotion has an action point. And in the negative emotion cycle in particular, the action point is, can I change something or do I have to accept something? Because then I have to change my thinking about it, right? Those are the only two options when you get to the end of the negative emotion cycle. Either I change this thing or I change myself. Only two options. So when you're asking this question, why is this so hard? Your frustration, it's called anger, by the way, even when you call it frustration, primary color emotions is called anger, and anger is the beginning of the negative emotion cycle. So the goal of feeling that frustration is to get to the what can I do about it? And if I'm doing this because I think it's beneficial for myself, then I have to change the state that I'm in, right? Which means I change my expectations. So I feel anger, sad, fear, responsibility, or guilt. And once I get to the end of that, and I may not feel the fear or the guilt in that because I may start with anger and immediately that's the goal. I want you to get to the responsibility, right? But we want to spend less time being frustrated, less time looking for answers about why this is so hard, and more time reminding ourselves, you know what, it's okay. Check in with, am I making this too stressful? Am I trying to do too much? Am I challenging myself too much? If I'm not, and you may have to process that with someone, you may have to have a therapist or a friend or a coach or a peer or a mentor who helps you process through that when you're hard on yourself, because you may not be able to see it in yourself, right? But once we get to that end, usually the answer, if I'm wired this way, is because I want it to be. And then I need to accept that it's hard and motivate whatever version of my personality comes out when I'm doing hard stuff, right? Most of you who this is beneficial for, most of you who have those talents, achiever, discipline, focus, restorative, competition, significance, those kinds of things, most of you are doing this in a healthier way. Because if you weren't, you'd be spiraling about it, right? You'd be like, I got to figure out how to make this easier. This should be easier. Those types of people who get into the spirals about it, those are the ones for whom it probably isn't as helpful as you think it is. And then we need to solve or heal those past versions of us that are causing us to believe that something that's not good for us is good for us. And I don't think we realize how often those spirals are actually just echoes of old expectations we've been taught we have to have. That if you heal over those things, and again, this is not true of everything. And those of you who have like diagnosed PTSD or CPTSD, this is a completely different issue. But what I'm talking about in these spirals, especially when I see them happen in coaching, and I know because we've talked about it, that they're not going so far below the line that they're in a complete trauma response. This is more like an echo of an old pattern, right? But because it's so hardwired in you to feel like you have to make it hard on yourself, you're continuing to do it even though it's not bringing you the results that you want. And when that consistently happens, we want to go back in time and heal all of those places, replace the skill chains, reparent ourselves, do the work. And yeah, it takes time. I'm not saying that it will be easy. I'm saying if you want to stop having the outcomes that you're having, we have to change something. And often the change requires us doing quite a bit of healing and work in the past. And this is why when we talk about success ideology, we're not just talking about grit or motivation or, like push yourself, etc. Because sometimes there are things that are keeping us objectively from doing those things, where if we would heal that, if we would integrate those parts of ourselves, we could be a lot more content, secure, happy, more consistently. But it's the old echoes of things that are causing us not to be that way. So that's the answer to this question in number 4 about being hard on yourself. Hopefully, if you are spiral type about that, you will go seek out some places. I always encourage people to start with either Sarah Baldwin or Thais Gibson of the Personal Development School. I think it's just personaldevelopmentschool.com, because so much of our spiraling, and especially our internal family system stuff, right, is attachment related. It's either echoing, right, or it's attachment stuff, and they can overlap. But yeah, I would check out either Sarah Baldwin or Thais Gibson. Okay, answer number 5 to why is this so hard is that the pressure of making money is too much for your creativity. So many of us, when we add finances into the situation when it comes to creative endeavors, and we are putting the pressure on our creativity to produce financial benefit for us because of the way the industry works, because of the saturation in the markets, because of just general difficulty in producing a consistent financial outcome from such a competitive entertainment industry, which is not stable. it can be very difficult for us when we are putting that financial pressure on ourselves to continue to maintain enough security to have creative space. And when you're a person who needs security and stability in order to have creative space, it's going to be very, very hard for you to write when your income goes down. It's going to be hard for you to write when your page reads go down because you are getting more and more stressed and worried about not being able to pay your mortgage or pay your bills or pay off your debt or pay for your kids' college. And that stress is causing a hamper on your creativity because there's so much pressure that it doesn't know how to deliver a product that is for sure going to accomplish what you want because your creativity instinctively understands the stakes of the game. The intuitive creative part of you understands that we don't really know how things are going to go. There is no way to 100% predict what people are going to like and what they aren't. So the more you try to put pressure on that creative part of you to produce something that you know for sure is going to get you where you want to go, if you're wired this way, the more the pressure will stifle you. So if you see yourself becoming less and less creative, the more and more financial pressure is put on you. You need to find another way. And I know most of us don't want to hear this, but you need to find another way to create financial stability for yourself. And I can't tell you how many writers I've coached in the last 10 years where when they've had a change in their finances because they've had to start producing money in other ways, their royalties have gone down enough, their sales went down enough, they had to get another job, how much their creativity comes back because it was the job of writing that was stifling the creativity. So again, not everybody's wired this way, but when you are, please, for the love of everything holy, just get a job. And I don't mean there is nothing shameful about getting a job when your royalties go down. And if you think there is, we need to do some work on that part of yourself because you can't control the industry. You can't good work your way into control of the industry. You cannot force sales to happen when things shift, when there is a retraction, when there are changes in people's purchase habits. You can't force and change any of that. So there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing unrighteous about you when your royalties go down. And we get so attached to feeling like, but if this dream goes away, right? If this future dream goes away, then we start clawing into this creativity and it's you're just going to kill it. And again, not everybody's like this, but when we are, it is so important to relieve the stress, even just by getting a part-time job. And the more you're reacting to this, like, I can't do that, I can't do that, that probably needs some coaching or some therapy, that feeling, because until we face that fear, it's going to continue to control us. And I'm here to tell you, again, author for life, I'm here to tell you there is nothing in this industry that you can't come back from. There's no amount of, I had to get a part-time job, I had to pay my bills that you can't come back from. Not just, there is nothing special about this moment in terms of even during the gold rush. Like, yes, there was a higher likelihood that you were going to get seen more quickly because there was less saturation during the gold rush for a time period that ended very quickly, actually. I don't think we realized how fast it ended. But just because the gold rush is over does not mean that anything is closed. And that's the difference between a non-renewable resource like gold. I mean, yes, it's renewable, but not immediately renewable. And the renewable resource of reader attention, reader finances, things like that. The gold in the gold rush was attention. So attention is now a more scarce resource, yes, but it still renews very quickly. And there's always openness in the market. There's always going to be room for new things. We don't understand what the resources really are when we're starting to feel like, but I can't, because right now is the time, right? It's like, nope, there's always going to be a time when you could be making more than you're making. But if it's not right now, we have to trust that it's possible that it will come again, because we have to be willing to make decisions to take care of ourselves. And some of you are listening to this being like, yawn, of course I'm going to do that. But the people who want to not let go of this, the people who are getting farther and farther and farther down the road, who are saying like, I can't get a job, I can't get a job, I can't get a job. And again, I recognize how frustrated some of you are going to be listening to me say this, because there's so much fear wrapped up in that. But I'm going to tell you, at some point it will come for you. At some point you will not be able to get away from it, and it will come for you. And it's okay if you want to wait for that moment. I'm just telling you, if it was me, I would want to get ahead of it so that I could save myself from that despair. It's going to be hard to go through no matter what. And a lot of us are going to have to deal with this at some point in our lives. A lot of us are going to have to do the, well, I got to go bag groceries for a while, or I got to go work at Home Depot for a while, or something like that. And I'm trying really hard not to write off the emotions about this, because they're very big for you when you're feeling them. And I understand that, and I have compassion for it. And if you talk to a coach or therapist about it, you're going to get more individualized compassion than I can give to when I'm talking to a group of people. But also, it is very important for you to understand that the giving of hard truths for me comes from a desire to see you have what you actually want. Because in the moment when we're feeling the survival instincts kick in, what we want is survival in that moment. And survival doesn't always look like perpetuating the track that we're on, but we have to know that there's another way to get back to where we want to be in the future. We just have to take care of ourselves first. Okay, I'm going to stop because I know some of you are like, I've lost some people. Some people closed the video on that one or switched to the next answer because they just didn't want to hear it, and that's fine. And I don't want to torture the rest of you. So let's move on. But thank you for listening to that. I know that was hard. Answer number 6 to why is this so hard? For some of you, it's about the reception to your last book. So there's kind of two directions this can go. Either the reception to your last book was way, way worse than you expected it to be. And now you have some traits. And usually we see this with things like strategic, futuristic significance, and competition, where I'm now assuming that it's just going to get worse from here. And I don't want to live in that reality. Like, I don't want to cast forward into that future. And I've seen people stop series and stop sometimes even well producing series because they just can't get past that feeling of like, the reception was so bad, I can't live through that again. That's totally fine with me if that's the decision that you want to make. And a lot of people who are like that will move on to a different genre or like try something new. And what we usually see is, if they were releasing one at a time on that trajectory, that they'll now start doing like packets of 3 that they finish first so that they can get far enough into the series. But sometimes we can't get past that. You can coach about it, especially if you have any of those 4 strengths. Like, it's easy for me to find the spaces in that. If you coach with Claire Taylor, she can do Enneagram work on that. There's probably a core fear that's going on that needs to get soothed a little bit. But that's kind of the one side of that where the reception was poor. Then there's a whole different side to this answer where the reception is better than you thought. Those of you who take off, who did not expect it, those of you who have wild viral books that you did not expect, that feel a little bit too good to be true. And in that case, the hardest part about that is you are inundated with reader expectations now in a way that you weren't before. And I know this will be hard to listen to because you're not going to want to do this, but you need to disconnect from all the places where you are getting expectations from people. And as much as possible, try to recapture what you had when you were writing the first book. Listening to people's opinions more is not the way to get back what you did. And I think this is so important. So many of us just don't realize this. We think, well, I did something wrong the first time, so now I've got to fix all those problems. When the reality is, people are going to complain about stuff no matter what when your book is popular. There's always going to be stuff people are going to complain about. If you captured magic in a bottle, you want to capture magic in a bottle again. You don't want to change your process. And this is hard for me to talk about because there are some people, and I could see their faces, that when I've coached them through this, that desire to please the audience is so significant in them, they just can't shut this off. And there are some major, major underlying fears. And again, I usually suggest that they go to Claire to talk about because there's some stuff that strengths just can't touch. And that's usually when we're picking that live wire nerve. I talk about it a lot. Like there's a nerve that when you cut, it gets exposed. And when you can see the nerve, and I'm just doing my hand because I've had some carpal tunnel stuff, right? So I know this nerve gets pinched and then it feels very icky. But when the nerve gets exposed, that is such a live wire that when you touch it, it's gonna just like it's going to be the worst pain that you can think of. And that's what happens when you touch that core motivation is that if any of you've had this experience before, right, where you can feel the numbness or the pinching or whatever. I'm not talking about uh, this is surgery stuff, but that feeling, you can feel how powerful that nerve is under there, even just when it's getting compressed and it's stressed. And imagine when you're having that surgery and then they are exposing that. And if someone were to touch that, the level of pain that you would feel, that's how that essential pain feels underneath the surface when you touch that live wire fear of whatever the core desire is that you have. And being able to heal over that can help a lot. But again, this is why I say like a lot of us just get caught in these patterns because the fixes are so complicated and they take so much time. And most of us want the fix to happen right now. We want the relief to happen right now, which is why we do coping skills and soothing and stuff like that. And I still think that nervous system regulation is the key here. Even if you don't want to do the long-term work, that's fine. But I will say, like the people who I've coached who've done the long-term work on this, especially when you know you have a live wire nerve like that, that is just consistently stopping you, terrifying you, and pushing you into those states. We want to do everything we can to heal over that state. And I think what some of us do is we try to build infrastructure around it. Like, I'm just going to try to never fail. If I'm afraid of failure, then I'm going to try to never, ever fail because I can't fail. I'm not allowing myself to fail. But that's not actually healing the nerve, just me trying to madly control everything so that I don't feel the feeling of what it feels like to fail. That's not actually healing my fear of failure. That's building a whole set of armor over it where that's going to get infected underneath and it's going to still cause the same problems, and sometimes worse problems. Because then what happens when the infrastructure fails? Now I'm suddenly just exposed to all of the elements and it's really infected under there. And now I don't know what to do, right? Like that's what happens when we don't address and heal and soothe those wounds. And there's a reason, like there is a biological reason why most of us, when we get into our older age years, start deciding we got to fix some of these things because we've been having results over and over and over again for a decade or two, and we don't like those results. And so now we go looking for ways to fix them. This is me encouraging us because, and I've told some of you this story before, I started doing this emotional work in my mid 20s because I was so fractured internally from things that just life that happened to me when I was growing up. I was so internally fractured. I couldn't even feel emotions. They were so terrifying to me to feel. And I needed to go through this process. And it was a 2 year process, 18 months to 2 year process of every single day changing the way that I was acting, building skills. There's a big difference between I can't fail and I can't yet fail. If all I need to do is build skills around that and heal myself, like re-experience some of those things and trust and teach myself how to handle that, then I can get to the other side of that fear. It absolutely is not impossible. just because I think I can't do it. Usually that's a just can't yet. I can't yet fail, but I can learn how to do it in a way that's safe, that preserves the healing of that nerve, but that helps me to be able to cope with it in a way that isn't going to cause problems later. Because I don't want to build coping mechanisms that are just going to cause me more problems later. And me just trying to control everything so I never fail is not healing my fear of failure. So I'm going to stop coming for everybody on that one because I know that's going to cause some big feelings in people, and I want to move on to the next answer. But that is an important one, and I may have to do a whole series of episodes on this. And by the way, if anybody wants deeper dives in any of this stuff, especially as it regards skill chains, I'm going to try to do some more content around these, in particular, trying to illustrate some ways that we can handle these things and deal with them. Because again, this is my, like, we're just going to keep repeating this. There's a difference between can't and can't yet. I think that's important. Okay, answer number 7. Why is this so hard? You are burned out or overwhelmed. And if this is the case, then it's going to continue to be hard for me until I heal the burnout or handle the overwhelm. And I think a lot of us are waiting for the overwhelm to just go away because we want to not be inundated by this feeling anymore, right? And I understand that. I get that. Or we want to try to change the exterior world. Like I want to change the industry, change the market, etc., and try to affect some kind of a change. And I get really angry about the changes in the market. And I feel constantly like I need to do something about this. And I'm like, okay, that feels like a below the line feeling. What we want to do then is get above the line because we want to be able to have some conversations about this overwhelm in a way that's going to help me. If there's actually something to be done about it, I want to do something. If I could, for instance, change genres, if I could, for instance, start writing the book of my heart instead of writing to market, whatever it is, or vice versa, start writing to market instead of writing the book of my heart, whatever it is. If there's something to be done, I want to make that decision when I'm above the line, not below it. That's the big goal. Because when I'm making decisions that I think are going to solve my overwhelm problem or my burnout problem, but I'm below the line when I'm making them, there's a less likely chance that that's actually going to be the solve for the problem. Because when you're below the line, what your body and brain actually want is just for you to get above the line again. And you don't know that because you're listening to the logic below the line. So we've talked about this in previous videos. If you have more questions, ask them. But this is really important for this answer. When you are burned out or overwhelmed, you have an energy penny exchange rate that has increased. So, our typical energy penny exchange rate, when everything is fine, all is normal, everything's good in the world, in the industry, in our families, is 1 to 1. So, it costs me 1 energy penny to do this. It's always going to cost me 1 energy penny in that exchange. That would be $1 American to $1 American. When the stress goes up, the exchange rate goes up. And all of a sudden, I'm now getting 2 pennies for what used to cost me one. And I'm going into arrears if I try to do all of the same things that I used to do. What usually happens, this happens when we're sick, by the way, too. This is why you can only do a few things when you're sick, is because the exchange rate of your energy has gone up. And what used to cost you 1 penny just because life was normal now costs you 3 or 4 because you're so stressed, but your body's physically stressed. So it's using more energy to accomplish the same tasks that it used to use. So when your energy penny exchange rate goes up, you're stressed, you're overwhelmed, you're tired, you're burned out, etc., you're sick, all those things, then it's going to cost you more. But you don't know that because you're not conscious of it. Your body doesn't go into like red mode or something like your car does when you're out of gas. Like you can't necessarily feel it unless you are practiced at feeling it, which again, I still think there's a lot to be said for having at least a little bit of vigilance about how you physically feel so that you can keep yourself out of the red zone. But that's just me. I'm way too hypervigilant. So don't be me, but I like the idea of just even understanding the metaphor of the exchange rate. When you're tired, burned out, etc., and your exchange rate continues to go up, especially if it's using more and more types of energy, like we talked about the kind of different types in one of the Energy Penny videos from like 4 or 5 years ago, where I talked about the different metals that your energy can be made of and how essentially when you're doing certain tasks, it's like doing a silver and a gold and a platinum and a bronze all at the same time, which means it's going to cost you 10 pennies instead of one. But that means that your normal exchange rate is 10 to 10. But when you have a higher exchange rate, and it's not a normal $1 to $1 anymore. Now all of a sudden something that used to cost you 10 is now costing you 30. And most of us don't have any amount of capacity to account for that, right? We don't have enough stores of energy. We don't have, like, there's just not a possibility to do that. And creative writing is one of those 10 tasks, right? Where I'm using again, the gold, silver, bronze, platinum. I'm using everything in my store, every different type of energy that I have. And now I'm unable to write when I'm in overwhelm or burnout because I don't have the ability to do 30 pennies worth of energy. So I know that this is a lot to think about, but I mainly just want to increase our awareness of this. Because when you're asking me, oh, why is this so hard? And I'm like, but you're burned out. It should be hard. And that moment again is the frustration of that. Why is this so hard? We want to get to the responsibility. What can I do about this? So, can I renegotiate my experience and change something about what I'm expecting of myself? Can I change reality? Can I move my deadline? Can I get time off work? Can I ask for help from people in my immediate system? Can I, right? Like all those kinds of questions. Is there something I can change? If there's nothing I can change, then I have got to change my expectation that it shouldn't be this hard. Because sometimes, and this is weird, sometimes when we just expect things to be hard, it's so much easier to deal with them. Because now I'm not expecting it to be easy, I'm expecting it to be hard. So when it's hard, I'm not surprised. And then my energy penny exchange rate doesn't go up as much because I'm not as stressed about it. And this is why acceptance is so phenomenally important. You are not demotivating. There is an exception to this rule for people who are very high in positivity futuristic. So if you're that, this is an exception. Reality is not for you. It's fine. You can be in the clouds. It's beneficial for you. But for most of us, when we expect something to happen and then it happens, we are not stressed by that. For most of us. But when we expect something to happen and then something worse happens, that stresses us out. When we expect something to happen and it's better, there's a segment of us that gets stressed out by that because when things go too well, that's dangerous. But again, we can we can learn how to deal with that part. But most of us need to learn acceptance specifically because of this stress level. When I expect it to be easy and it isn't, my stress goes up. So I just want to do everything I can to change my expectations when I know something is going to be hard so that I feel good, less stressed, right? And I may need to ask for support. I may need to ask for concessions. That may be uncomfortable for me, but it's going to be worth it to lower that energy penny exchange rate. Answer number 8 to why is this so hard? There is more work to do when you become more successful. So a lot of us believe that if I could just be making 7 figures, that my life would be handled. You don't always have an easier life, like personal life, just because you're making more money. In fact, most of the time, your life gets more difficult and more complicated when you're making more money if you are wired in ways that are beneficial to humanity. When you make more money and you're a sociopath, it doesn't get harder for you because it doesn't matter to you what happens to other people. But the higher likelihood is I would assume for most, if not all of you listening to this, you get more stressed as you make more money because now you're starting to have to hire people. You're starting to have your family rely on your income. And that now creates stress for you that you didn't have before because now we have to make this business continue. I pay my bills from my business. So now if my business suffers, all of a sudden I start to feel stress about my life, right? So it creates a lot more stress than we think it does. And again, I'm not saying we shouldn't want it if we want it. I'm just saying those of us who are in the space where we have experienced this know that there's often not a lot of difference between what I take home when I make $150,000 and when I make 700,000 because there's an awful lot of stuff that has to happen in between those two spaces. I am not saying that anyone who's wealthy has it harder than anyone who isn't. My intention is to say to the people who are in this space, when you are making more money and you are more successful, there is a lot more for you to do, and you're going to be more stressed out than you anticipated because you thought everything was just going to get easier when you made four or $500,000. You didn't anticipate how stressful it was going to be to try to keep the machine running in a bigger and bigger and bigger wheel. Like you didn't see that coming. So when it happens and you first realize it, when you've been in it for a long time, this becomes a normal part of running a bigger business. But especially when I see people who are first like existing in this space where all of a sudden I may have never managed $500,000 before. And now I have to manage $500,000 in a way that hopefully makes me more money next year. And the stress of that can be really significant. And sometimes it can impact your creativity. But even if it doesn't, you're still doing more work than you used to. And if you happen to be a person who also really likes to write, there's a higher likelihood that you're going to deprioritize your writing because you are so worried about not doing all of these other things. And it can be really hard to bring people on as support. It can be difficult because you have to train people and then you have to teach people to do things that you've been doing yourself. And it can be like a lot of us can resist bringing on help or support, especially like permanently, because again, it's a lot of pressure. But there are so many things that change as you make more and more money. And as you start to become more successful, you have to add more and more things to your plate to manage. And then you're probably writing less, which is probably stressful because it's probably why you got into this in the first place. So many of us, as we're negotiating this place between, like, let's say, especially low six figures and mid, is where I see this the most, where you're finally made it in your mind, right? I still don't think that's like, I don't think that any of us should be attaching our worth to any amount of money that we make because I think that's dangerous in the long run for infrastructure, internal reasons. But there are people who are money motivated where it's healthy for them. So I'm also going to say that what I just said doesn't apply to every single person. But when I am wired in a way where I take on a lot of responsibility or I care about the people that I'm hiring or I'm very attached to certain things about the way my business works, and then things change, it's going to get more and more difficult for me to be doing work as my gets bigger. Not to mention, and this is a huge reason that we just don't talk about a lot in the industry because a lot of the people who make it to those higher levels don't actually like doing all of the work that it takes to make the businesses bigger. So some people do, and those are the ones that you see getting excited about, work, all the work that they're doing. But a lot of people get really tired by having to do all of the work that's required to run a seven-figure business, and they just start to get more and more exhausted, and it starts to weigh on them. And again, over time, that exchange rate builds up to a point where they're going to burn out and it's going to become more and more difficult for them. But they often don't see it happening because it's like the frog in water, right? If you turn the water up when the frog's in the pot and it's cool, they won't always notice that it's cooking them. But as it starts to get more and more heated, there may or may not be a consciousness about it at all. And the discomfort when we finally feel it may come too late because then it might be like all hands on deck. I got to make a big change now. This happened to me, by the way. And that's one of the reasons that I didn't make content last year. I don't know if any of you noticed this, but I didn't make Quitcast episodes last year. I did two. And I barely got those two out under like complete duress. I just didn't want to do it anymore. And for me, it was I do not want to do all of the things that are required to do to run a nine-figure business, right? Like I don't want to be one of those people. And I had to go through this real reckoning with myself about what is it that I want to get out of this life? What are the most important things to me? What do I think my purpose is here? How can I contribute the best? What do I love, right? I had to go through this whole reckoning because I was in this place where the more successful you get, the more work there is to do. And if you don't adore doing the work, if you're doing it for survival reasons, then at some point you're going to burn out of the capacity to do it. And so part of coming back this year for me to the Quitcast has been I've got to let myself do what I want to do. And our character episodes, because we can't use the strengths names in the titles, our character episodes are not getting viewed as much. And that has been frustrating for somebody who's high significance, who really wants to be able to help people with these problems that they're having when it comes to character development. But I'm not allowed to do the things I really want to do, right? Because I don't own strengths. I don't, Gallup does. And they get to decide that stuff, right? So if I want to do the things I want to do, then I have to do it in a way that's sustainable for me. I can't just make author help episodes about success and about sustainability and burnout and those and productivity and those types of content. I can't make that all the time because it will eventually cause me to burn out. So I had to go through this myself. It's painful to go through. But when you're at that level where you are having success and there is more work to do, you have to go through this. Why is this so hard? And the answer is because there's so much more to do. And if you don't get excited about the work, if the work isn't extremely fun for you, then it's going to eventually reach a point where it's not sustainable for you to continue doing it all, right? And then you got to negotiate that. Okay, answer number 9 to why is this so hard? When you are wired to pay attention to right wrong indicators about writing process, in particular, when you're watching other people's processes and they're being very, very right wrong language or moralistic about the correct way to do it, you are likely to try to change your own process in order to fit in with whatever those right wrong indicators are. So people who are like, you shouldn't be editing a blank page, you have to write every day, you have to outline, or flip side, it's not it won't have any heart if you don't pants it. Only discovery writers can write emotional drafts or whatever it is that you're hearing that's telling you you should be different than how you are. There's only so much of that that you can sustain. The more you change your process to fit into other people's expectations, the less likely you are to have a sustainable, again, author for life, a sustainable author life. So the goal then becomes I have to be willing to put the work in to question the premise of these things that I have believed about myself and to find ways to increase my capacity in a way that's aligned for me. And we do everything we can to try to produce resources about how to do that. But it is sometimes very difficult to align people without being able to talk to them. So this is why I'm still doing coaching. We have spots left in my quarterly calendar that where we meet in person twice a year and we meet for development twice a year. I still have spots in my monthly program where we're trying to do, although not very many, and I don't know if when we air this, if there's going to be spots, but right now there are at least 2 spots still open for that. That's a yearly program where we go through all 10 of your strengths and try to do some alignment there. But again, not everybody has the time or the resources or the inclination to do that. So we still try to help with the free live coaching that we do every month on the Crowdcast with episodes on the Quitcast that we're leaving up, even though some of them are so dated. It frustrates me to even watch them sometimes, but they're helpful in as much as they can be. And then I'm trying to continue to produce new content. But sometimes I can't help you align unless I talk to you because there's something very unique about your situation that isn't lining up with the common patterns that we see. When you line up with the common patterns, like if you watch our strengths videos, which is betterfasteracademy.com/next hyphen steps hyphen videos. So if you watch our videos on your individual traits about how they appear in writers, then you can sometimes align yourself and then you don't need to come and talk to us. And but if you can't, you might need to come and talk to one of us. And I hate that it is that way. I wish that we could just provide all of the learning resources that you need and you wouldn't have to come and talk to someone because I think that would be more effective. And that would be my goal if I owned strengths, but I don't. So, my hope for you is that you can do everything in your power to become more aligned so that your writing process is better for you and will help however we can, including hopefully doing more work on development in the future. But we'll do whatever we can for you. We also have a development level on our Patreon where we do group coaching about just one strength every month. So keep an eye on that as well, because some of the alignment that we do, like I can do an awful lot of alignment for you in a group when we're focused on only one strength. We don't necessarily need to have this big, like one-on-one, because some of what you can get from just experiencing it together with us. So check that out, the development level on the Patreon, if that's of interest to you. But again, the goal here is to say we have to question the premise. And if you're able to do that yourself, I highly encourage you to do it. Otherwise, find some support. Answer number 10 to why is this so hard is life changes on you. So you might get sick, you might move across the country, you might get divorced, you might have a kid, you might get married. There are all these things that might happen to you. And when you're disrupted, if you have a high stability seeking personality, or if you have a lot of relationship building or strategic thinking strengths, you are likely to have your creativity disrupted when you have life disruptions. High discipline, high futuristic, especially high focus. This can happen too, high responsibility. But otherwise, it's usually the relationship building and the thinking strengths that are the cause of this, just because of the way that you process books when you write. But when life changes on you and you didn't choose for it to happen, there's often a resistance to accepting the outcome of whatever it is that has changed. And I understand that. I don't want us to become complacent about just accepting every single thing because there are some things that we do have to change. But there is so much that happens when life changes that, yes, you want to get through the transition period where we feel all the feelings about it. But at some point, we have to get to stasis. At some point, we have to learn how to get ourselves above the line consistently enough about this that we can continue on with normal life and get into a transition. The more we stay in flux, the more we allow ourselves to continue going below the line. And I say allow ourselves because I think a lot of us have such a fear of things changing on us in the exterior world in on many levels, right? On a global, international, national, local, regional sort of scale, right? We and then familial, relational, right? All the way down. We have these expectations that things shouldn't change unless we want them to, and we don't realize how much of that drives what we do. And again, I'm not saying that no matter what, you should just practice this complacency. I'm not encouraging that. I think there's a lot that can be done to make sure that we're able to stay in our agency at every level. But the more we let ourselves be dysregulated, the more, and again, you can be regulated and still be in touch with all four of your negative emotions, but it's the dysregulation that I'm trying to keep us from. When I'm regulated, I can feel anger, sadness, fear, and guilt and take action on them and still be, I can be frustrated. Oh, don't do that. That's not a good thing. Let's stop doing that. Versus the feeling of below the line of, I can't even fathom how this is possible. I can't even understand, right? Like that feeling, that below the line feeling, that is a signal that we need to get back above the line so that we can find the action points, because we can't find the action points when we're below the line. This is so important for me. When I'm trying to adjust to transitions, if I can get through the transition as quickly as possible, and again, this happens more often with things like sickness, injury, stuff like that, right? Where it's still going to be frustrating. I'm still going to be stuck in stasis for a time period, but it might be easier for me to get through that because it is a more predictable or understandable, I guess, curve versus the things that are less predictable or less understandable. And those are the things that we want to try as much as possible to maintain an above the line high agency state where we're continuing to make sure that we are in a fit state all the time. We're always regulating whenever we can. Every time we notice ourselves getting dysregulated, we regulate so that we can be aware, conscious, and logical in those fit states, right? And I've talked a lot lately about regulation and dysregulation, and I think I'm going to stop using those words because I think people are starting to lose a sense of what they actually are, because you can be below the line and feel very certain that you're fine, but the evidence of your exterior actions is that you are not fine. You are terrified. But you can feel very self-possessed, very logical, very in control below the line. But the way that your body is responding is like you're in terror mode all the time. And you just don't see it because you're used to hanging out down there. So the goal is to get ourselves to a place where we can be in touch with our positive emotions in addition to our negative emotions. So our primary positive emotions, happy, grateful, hopeful, secure. I always get those mixed up. I need to come up with an acronym for those so I can remember them faster. But we want to be in touch with both positive and negative emotions, at least somewhat, so that we can make sure that we have access to both parts of our brain when we're making decisions. And again, I don't want to get too deep into this because we still have three more reasons. But when life changes on us, and writing is hard, or the writing world is hard because of this, connection and community becomes really important. Maintaining our ability to see some kind of hope in the future for ourselves, even if the hope in the future is about our community or the way that we connect with each other. Whatever the hope is, we have to have something to latch onto to keep us above the line. When we feel nothing above the line, that's when I'm like, okay, I can't not call out the fact that we need to be able to get in touch with something, because that often means that we're going from anger to fear to anger to fear to anger to fear and just bouncing back and forth between those two emotions. And that is going to wear so much on our bodies. And it is not about not taking action. It's actually about taking action in a way that feels fully holistic and fully connected and fully grounded, so that we are not allowing ourselves to be controlled by that fear anger spiral, right? Like, which is, again, we can still feel those negative emotions above the line. I think that's just what I'm trying to say. Okay, let's move on. Answer number 11 to why is this so hard? Mental health can impact our creativity. And specifically, when we are in situations that are deteriorating our mental health, it can have a huge impact on the access that we have to our creativity, which is part of why my suggestion, anytime I see people who are starting to exhibit those signs, is find support as quickly as you can. And I know that's easier said than done sometimes. We are happy to try to help with that if we can. And what I usually do for people is I send them to the Gallup coaching directory. And this is not a be all end all, but because there are so many people in the world who are certified coaches and therapists, there are an awful lot of people who are both. There are a lot of people who are Enneagram coaches and therapists, just as a for instance. So I do encourage people whenever they're able to check out the coaching directory and see, because you can narrow it down by region, and you can narrow it down by, like, I want an IFS certified therapist or something like that, right? Who's in my state, who's accredited in my state. But I encourage people to go there a lot because I think that the combination of strengths plus therapy can be really helpful, and will help however we can. with things like, I know a lot of people take the Energy Pennies cards to their therapists, for instance. So things like that, the Burnout book and the Intuitive book are a couple that we see that are commonly purchased for therapists or referred to for therapists to read. So we're happy to help if we can, but I'm such a huge fan of getting the support that you need instead of trying to handle it on your own all the time. And I know there are some of us who are reluctant to rely on other people, reluctant to reach out for support. I totally understand that. I just wanted to say this in case it could be a catalyst. And if you're not in that space right now, don't feel guilty about it. You'll be in that space at some point in the future, and don't worry about it because you can only do what you can do right now. And if that's where you're at, that's where you're at. It will change at some point in the future. And so I just want us to understand, like, if we can't do it right now, we can try again later. Okay, number 12 answer is very specific to people who are in traditional publishing. Why is this so hard when I am not used to having to deal with publisher expectations and now I suddenly have to deal with publisher expectations? It can change your creative process when someone else gets involved in it. And I have coached so many authors who have traditional contracts who would do better if the traditional publishers would just let them the hell alone and do their process the way that they want them, the way that the author wants to do it, instead of the publisher trying to feel like, but we know better because we know the market, which is so often getting in the way of the author's process. But if you can't do that, if you can't ask them to back off, if you can't ask them to let you do it your own way, I would expect the process to be hard for you if you're used to exhibiting a lot of creative control over your process and now you can't. Like, I would expect it to be hard. And again, sometimes the main difference between expecting it to be hard and not is just the energy penny exchange rate stays lower when your expectations are met, right? When your expectations are met. So it might be as easy as that. You may be able to argue for a little bit more agency in your process. So I would encourage you to do that, even just to say something like, the book may not follow the outline, just so that you can hear, like, I have permission to not follow the outline and we'll deal with whatever we get at the end or something like that, right? But when publisher expectations are causing you to not be as free as you're used to being in your process, then that's something that needs to be negotiated with, and that can be an answer. And the final answer to why is this so hard, which again, there's so many more answers to this question that I will answer in individual coaching because people have unique situations. But this one I see so often. And this is interestingly the most about the book of all of them. Because, of course, there are some of the answers that are things like because I'm stuck, because I have intellection and I need to process those kinds of things, right? Because I need to think, why is this so hard? Because it just is. Because it should be, I guess, is maybe the answer for some of the it's about the book things. But this particular one about the book is the one that I see where people legitimately don't have perspective on this about themselves. And that is when you get deeper into a series, especially when you're ending a series or ending an arc, it is going to get more complicated to write because you have more to keep track of, you have more loops to close, there's more at stake. So, because you're getting farther into the arc, it is very, very common that final books in a series write really slow, final books in an arc, later books in a series write really slow. And even when you've had experience doing this before, because there is this iterative process of writing, I think a lot of writers have the why is this so hard feeling from a place of I just forgot where I am in the series. So this is one of those action points at the end where I've gotten through the frustration and now the primary action I need to take is just to remind myself it's supposed to be hard because I'm late in the series. It's supposed to be hard because I'm finishing a series, and it will be okay that it's hard. It's not a problem that it's hard. It's not a signal about anything that it's hard. It's just hard, and that's okay. Not that it's fun. Because again, when I say some of these, like we need to accept it, it's not an acceptance because we want it to be that way. It's an acceptance because if I keep expecting it to be different, I'm going to keep getting dysregulated about it. If I expect this book is going to write easy, and then every time it doesn't, I get frustrated, but I can't solve the problem because it's supposed to be hard. Reality hasn't changed, right? I'm going to keep getting dysregulated about it because my expectation doesn't match reality. And reality's not going to change. So if I don't change my expectation, then it's just going to cause me more and more and more stress. And that's why the exchange rate goes up. The energy penny exchange rate goes up when the stress goes up, is because we just keep getting dysregulated about it. So everything we can do to practice acceptance about the process when it's necessary, when it cannot be changed, is important. And I do think it's important for us when we ask this question and we're parsing through the answers for ourselves, that we do go down the road of, is there anything I can change about this situation? Because sometimes there is. And if there's nothing I can do, then the goal is acceptance. The goal is to expect it to happen. And I think there's a big difference between acceptance, like, I'm glad this is happening, and acceptance, which is, this is happening and there's nothing I can do to change it. So I'm going to stop letting it dysregulate me. I'm going to now expect, and this bears a lot of resemblance to the concept of gray rocking, right? Where I'm going to treat the industry as though it is an abusive narcissist. And I'm going to expect it to act in the way that abusive narcissists act, which is to not care about how I feel, or to kind of like torture me a little bit. So I'm going to just expect it to act that way. And instead of me getting dysregulated when it acts that way, I'm now going to expect it to act that way. Not like it, I don't like it. But the only option is, if I'm going to change something, because again, the two options are change reality or change myself. If I'm going to change something because I don't like it enough that the industry is acting like an abusive narcissist, then I can leave the industry. That is an option. I can choose to just not publish anymore. But if I don't want to do that because I can build my skills, I can learn how to do things that will make me more resilient in this industry, then I don't have to let it beat me. I get to stay, I get to function and be stable and secure, not because the industry changes, but because I change, because I refuse to be dysregulated by something that I can't control. I refuse to allow something that is beyond my ability to affect it to have any say in whether I'm stressed out or not. I refuse to do that because I can always find a way to get myself above the line and to find something that I can do to either change reality just a little bit or to become more and more accepting. And some of this happens in acceptance, by the way, when I've talked people through this in coaching before. We'll get to the point where I say, we talk about this a lot with the rise of competition in the market, right? Is there something I can do about it? No, I can't change the fact that the market is competitive. I can't change the fact that people's ability to produce masses and masses of books is going to proliferate. I cannot do anything about that. And if I continue to get dysregulated about it, I'm just going to continue paying the consequences for that dysregulation rather than expecting it to be that way. So, okay, I can't change anything about that. Do I like it? No. Do I not like it enough? And this is kind of the decision tree. Do I not like it enough that I'm going to leave the industry? Sometimes the answer is yes, even if just for a time period. And I've coached multiple people recently who have decided to leave the industry for a time period until they decide they want to come back, until either it feels more predictable or they can write for fun again or whatever it is, right? But if I answer yes, then that's the answer. My action point is leave the industry. If I answer no, I don't want to leave, I'm not going to leave, then the answer is I need to acquire better skills for how to handle the unpredictability and how to be more resilient. I need to do whatever I can to create more financial security for myself, which might mean reducing my budget. It might mean getting a part time job somewhere. It might mean finding additional sources of revenue. It probably won't mean trying to increase my revenue in the author life unless I have really easy, accessible ways to do that. But it might mean finding additional sources of revenue. It might mean finding more support. It might mean changing genres. It might mean there are all kinds of things it might mean. It might mean leaving social media. It might mean leaving author groups. It might mean all sorts of things like that. It might mean traveling more. It might mean connecting more with other authors, right? But if I decide to stay and I decide that I'm going to be more resilient, part of being more resilient is not allowing it to dysregulate you anymore. When someone says something that represents an old version of how you used to get dysregulated, we're going to practice the skills of maintaining regulation so that I don't allow myself to go below the line about that. Because I'm no longer going to expect reality to change. I have fully assimilated my expectations that reality is going to stay as it is. And now I'm going to work on what can I change right now? And not what can I change in the future either, because that's a down the road question, but what can I change absolutely today, right now? What thing can I do? Because this is often what I'll encourage people to do in the like I'm so far below the line about this. What thing can I do or latch on to where I can have a regular action that I create? So like I have a client who's so high consistency, so dysregulated about the unfairness in the world and in the industry. And we're always looking for ways that they can contribute to something because they have a decent amount of money. Always looking for ways that they can contribute to something to try to bridge the unfairness gap, right? So they do a lot of, hey, can I sponsor this? Can I contribute to this? Can I donate to this? Because that's something they can do very quickly. But we've also started challenging them to try to come up with other creative options that don't just involve money, because also I can do an act of gratitude, an act of kindness, an act of joy, right? An act of happiness, an act of hopefulness. I can do something physically if I'm not able to spend the money in that moment because maybe they don't want to just expend their resources for forever. But there are physical things that I can do to create a presence of positive engagement, a presence of hopefulness, a presence. And it might be for some of us writing books. That might be the answer because what we're going to try to do is create more of what we want in the world instead of focusing on where we are frustrated or where things are lacking or too competitive or limiting or whatever it is, right? But there is a way, and again, it might take coaching or support, but there is always a way to find something that you can do if you walk through all of those steps in the decision tree and you've decided that leaving the industry is not for you, that you want to stay and figure this out, but you can't just keep expecting things to be different over and over and over again and you getting dysregulated about it when there's nothing you can do in the moment to change. So we always ask at the end of the cycle, right? The emotion cycle, can I do something about this to change it? If yes, then I do it. If no, then I work on changing my own expectations and creating something that is beneficial or positive out of the situation. So I do a lot of encouragement of people, like when you get to the end of the cycle, I would also do the positive emotion cycle, one of which is gratitude. And then I would reach out to someone to create more positive connection in your life and create more gratitude for yourself and more presence of connection in your life. Because that's going to be super important for us if we're going to stay in the industry, if we're going to continue to engage. We have to be able to build intentional, positive relationships and connections in order to stay here. Even if we do them in very small ways, even if it takes us a long time to build them, it doesn't matter. It's worth putting the effort in. So I'm going to stop talking because this is very long now. But I wanted to do all 13 of these major ones. I did a very small TikTok video on this, 10 minutes, and it just wasn't enough. I kept wishing that I could do a longer version. So here's a longer version. Hopefully, this has been helpful. Please do ask questions in the comments if you have them. And I hope that you'll take a look at some of our character episodes because we do a different kind of style in each of those episodes. We usually focus on some kind of personality metric as a way of understanding characters, but then we also focus on single moments, small arcs, seasonal arcs. Like the Buffy episode is about like a seasonal arc, whereas we have some conflict episodes like the Diplomat episode or the Spock versus Kirk episode, things like that. So anyway, I hope you'll check those out. I hope you'll enjoy that content that we're making. I will make more QTP stuff, definitely, and more direct author mindset stuff. So hopefully this will be helpful for you. And I will see you on the next Quitcast. All right. Bye, everybody.